My name is Anna, and I want to share with you the miracle that completely changed my life. It was a day like any other. I woke up early, made breakfast for my kids, kissed my husband before he left for work, and hurried to start another day in my usual routine. I had a peaceful life, with a loving family and a career that was thriving. I felt fulfilled and, above all, grateful to God for so many blessings. I had always been a woman of faith. I grew up in the church, and from a young age, I learned that God is in control of all things. I knew that, but until that moment, I had never experienced anything that truly tested my faith. At least not in this way. It all started very subtly. A discomfort here, a pain there. At first, I thought it was just tiredness or the stress of daily life. After all, with the rush of work and taking care of the house and the kids, it was normal to feel a little worn out. However, the pain didn't go away. It became a constant presence in my life, like a silent warning that something was wrong. I tried to ignore it, always putting my responsibilities ahead of everything else. But at a certain point, it was impossible to avoid anymore. I remember mentioning the pain to my husband, and he insisted I see a doctor. Reluctantly, I scheduled an appointment. I wasn't really worried. I thought it might just be something simple, like a muscle problem, or that I was overreacting. But still, I went ahead and did the tests the doctor requested and continued with my routine. It was on a Friday when I went back to the doctor's office to get the results. I was alone, never imagining that my life was about to change forever. The doctor walked into the room with a serious look on his face, which made me a bit nervous, but I tried to stay calm. He looked at me and said the words no one is ever prepared to hear. "Anna, you have cancer." For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. I heard the words, but it was as if my brain couldn't process them. Cancer? How? It couldn't be true. I felt like the ground had disappeared from under my feet. Tears started to fill my eyes, but I forced myself to remain silent while he explained that it was an aggressive form of cancer, and it was already at an advanced stage. The treatment would be long, and the chances of a complete cure, small. I could barely hear the rest of the conversation. My head was spinning, and all I could think was, "Why me, Lord?" I left the doctor's office holding the test results, but feeling completely empty. I called my husband, and as soon as he answered, I couldn't hold back the tears. Telling him was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The silence on the other end of the line said it all. He was as devastated as I was. When I got home, the weight of that news fell heavily on our family. I tried to appear strong in front of the kids, but they knew something was wrong. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I went to my room, knelt beside the bed, and simply broke down. I couldn't even find words to pray. I could only cry. My heart was completely crushed, and all I could say, through tears, was, "God, please, help me." It was at that moment of complete desperation that I realized my own strength wasn't enough. I needed God more than ever. In that instant, even though I didn't know how or when, I cried out for a miracle. After the diagnosis, my life was never the same. In the first few days, everything around me felt like a blur. The pain in my chest wasn't just physical, it was emotional and spiritual too. I tried to hold myself together, but the truth was, inside, I was completely shattered. My mind couldn't stop repeating the words the doctor had said. The chances of a cure are small. It was as if, overnight, all the plans I had for the future had been ripped away from me. I returned home, and in the midst of that emotional storm, my family became my first refuge. My parents, my husband, and even my children, though they didn't fully understand what was happening, surrounded me with love. But despite that, there was a deep fear inside me that I couldn't put into words. Part of me wanted to give in to despair. And this was where my faith began to be truly tested. It was during one of those nights, while crying alone in my room, that I felt the need to seek God in a deeper way. I had always been a woman of prayer, always trusted in God. But now it was different. I was no longer praying for everyday blessings or for my family's protection. I was praying for my life. It was at this point that I began to cry out to God in a way I had never done before. I remember opening my Bible, looking for some kind of comfort, and the verse from Isaiah 53 verse 5 touched me deeply. By his stripes, we are healed. I read these words over and over again. Even in the face of such a grim diagnosis, something inside me lit up, a small flame of hope. This promise of healing gave me strength, and I began to pray according to this word. Lord, I know that you are the God of the impossible. I don't know how, but I believe you can heal me. It was a simple prayer, but full of faith. Gradually, I shared this spiritual battle with my family and friends. My church also joined the fight with me. Everyone began praying for me with fervor. The days were hard, full of uncertainty. But in the darkest moments, I felt the power of prayer envelop me like a cloak of peace. Though my body was weak, my soul was being strengthened. However, fear still tried to dominate me. There were days when I woke up wondering if God would really hear my prayers. The fear of death, of being separated from my family, of an uncertain future, it all weighed heavily on my heart. But even in moments of doubt, I refused to abandon my faith. I needed to believe. Then one night, in the middle of one of those lonely prayers, something inexplicable happened. I was kneeling, with tears streaming down my face, when I felt a presence so strong around me that I couldn't hold back the crying. It was a feeling of deep peace, something I had never experienced before. In that moment, I knew without a doubt that God was with me in this battle. A soft voice in my heart said, I am with you. Do not be afraid. That experience was a turning point for me. I knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but now there was something different, an indescribable peace. I was no longer just seeking the promise of healing, but the assurance that, no matter the outcome, God was in control. From that moment on, my prayers changed. I no longer prayed just to be healed. I began asking God to give me strength and courage to go through this process, no matter how things would unfold. If I were healed, it would be for His glory. But if the end was something else, I wanted to face it with faith and dignity. The following weeks were challenging. Every hospital visit, every new test brought a mix of emotions. The treatment hadn't started yet, but the spiritual battle was already in full swing. Time passed slowly, and I knew that my journey had only just begun. What I didn't know was that God was preparing something much greater than I could ever imagine. Soon after those intense weeks of prayer, the time came to face the treatment. I knew it would be a tough battle. When the doctor explained how the process would go, I confess the fear hit me all over again. Chemotherapy. Just hearing that word made my heart tighten. I had already heard about the side effects: nausea, extreme weakness, hair loss. It was an aggressive treatment, just like the disease that had taken over my body. On the day of my first chemotherapy session, I was terrified. On the way to the hospital, I held my husband's hand tightly, trying to stay calm, but inside, I was completely shaken. I remember praying silently, God, whatever happens, help me endure this. When I arrived at the hospital and saw other people going through the same treatment, I felt a mixture of sadness and solidarity. I wasn't the only one fighting for my life. The first session was exhausting. When the treatment started, I could feel the poison entering my body. It's hard to describe the exact feeling, but it was as if all my energy was being drained. I returned home completely debilitated. That night, the physical and emotional pain overwhelmed me. I laid in bed and cried like a child. My body felt weak, but my faith was still holding on. Even so, in silence, I questioned God. Why does it have to be like this, Lord? How long will this pain last? In the days that followed, the effects of chemotherapy got worse. The nausea was constant, and I could barely eat. I remember looking at my reflection in the mirror and barely recognizing myself. In just a few weeks, my hair began to fall out in large clumps, and that was a hard blow. Every strand of hair that I lost felt like I was losing a piece of myself. It was as if the disease was stealing my identity, my femininity, my strength. That's when I realized my battle wasn't just physical. The struggle was also in my mind and spirit. During this period, thoughts of giving up were constant. Discouragement tried to defeat me every day. I prayed, but it seemed like God was silent. The days were long and dark, and no matter how hard I tried to cling to my faith, the fear that the treatment wouldn't be enough grew with every new exam and every new appointment. However, in the midst of the pain and weakness, something profound began to change within me. Even in my hardest moments, I felt a subtle presence beside me. It was as if, in my moments of greatest suffering, God was closer than ever. During some of the chemotherapy sessions, when the exhaustion became unbearable, I felt an inexplicable peace come over me. It was as if God Himself was holding my hand, telling me, "I am here. Keep going. Don't give up." Those moments gave me the strength to carry on, even when my body said otherwise. I knew the road was long, but I wasn't fighting alone anymore. My family was by my side every step of the way, but it was God's presence that gave me the breath I needed to keep going. The doctors were clear. The prognosis was still uncertain. They were doing their best, but the chances of success were limited. Every new test brought uncertainty, and yet, something inside me kept believing. I began to pray with even more fervor, not just for healing, but for the strength to endure this journey. During one of my visits to the hospital, something unexpected happened. After an especially difficult session, a nurse came over to me. I'd never seen her before, but she approached and said, "Can I pray for you?" I was physically exhausted, and tears welled up in my eyes. That woman started praying right there, in the hospital hallway. Her words were simple but filled with faith. She asked God to strengthen me, that my healing would be complete, and that I would never lose hope. Her prayer touched my heart in a way I hadn't expected. It was like a reminder. God was still working, even when I couldn't see it. After that prayer, something changed inside me. I began to notice small signs. During the following chemotherapy sessions, though still difficult, I felt less pain than before. With every new test, though my condition hadn't drastically changed, the doctors began to notice slight improvements. They were subtle signs, but to me, they were glimpses of hope. I knew the road ahead was still long, but those signs gave me new strength. I started declaring out loud, "God is working, my healing is coming." With every new test, every new treatment, I repeated those words. It wasn't just a cry of faith, it was my certainty that God was with me in this battle. My family, friends, and church remained by my side, praying, encouraging me, and often crying with me. Not a day went by without someone sending me a word of encouragement or a prayer. That support network was crucial to help me keep fighting. Even in the midst of all the suffering, I knew that something great was coming. My body was weak, but my faith was being strengthened day by day. The words God gave me on that night of peace continued to echo in my heart. "I am by your side." I held on to that promise with all my strength, and so I kept going. One day at a time, the months of treatment passed slowly. Each new chemotherapy session seemed heavier than the last, but surprisingly, my faith remained intact. It was as if, day by day, God was preparing me for something greater. I didn't know exactly what He had planned, but I felt deep inside that something was about to happen. The prayers, the moments of peace in the midst of pain, and even the small improvements in the exams gave me strength to keep believing. And then came the day for a very important exam. I had been undergoing treatment for months, and the doctors wanted to see if the tumor had shrunk or if the cancer had spread. My heart was torn between hope and fear. By this time, I had learned to surrender my fears to God, but anxiety still tried to take over me. I entered the exam room, as I had done so many times before. But this time, something was different. I felt an unusual peace. While they prepared me for the scan, I took a deep breath and prayed silently, "Lord, whatever happens, I trust in you." I completed the exam and went home with my family, anxiously awaiting the results. A few days later, I received a call from the doctor's office. It was time to hear the results. My husband came with me this time. I wasn't sure what was waiting for us, but I held his hand firmly as we walked into the office. When the doctor entered the room, he seemed different. There was something in his eyes that immediately caught my attention. He sat down, looked at us, and in a somewhat perplexed tone said, "I don't know how to explain this." I felt my heart race. That moment felt like it lasted forever. He continued, "The results of your tests show something we didn't expect. The tumor has completely disappeared." His words seemed surreal. For a second, I couldn't process what was happening. Disappeared? What do you mean? I looked at my husband and saw tears filling his eyes. It was as if time had stopped. The doctor repeated, "There is no more sign of cancer. The tests are clear." At that moment, a whirlwind of emotions hit me. I felt a mixture of relief, joy, and a deep gratitude that I couldn't contain. I knew what had happened. God had answered my prayers. God had healed me. The doctor was still trying to explain what, to him, seemed inexplicable. He said they had repeated the tests several times, reviewed all the data, but found absolutely nothing. No cancer cells. He didn't know what to say, except that, medically speaking, it was unusual, almost impossible. But I knew the truth. It wasn't impossible for God. I had experienced a miracle. What medicine couldn't explain, I understood perfectly. For months, God had sustained me through the pain, the uncertainties, and the fear. He had been with me through every chemotherapy session, every night of tears and prayer. And now, He had completed what I had so desperately prayed for, my healing. When I left the doctor's office, my heart was overflowing with gratitude. I wanted to shout to the whole world what God had done. I called my family, my friends, and everyone began praising God with me. It was as if a wave of joy had swept not only over my home, but also my church, my neighbors, everyone who had followed my journey. People came to me, wanting to know how this had happened. And I always answered, "It was God. The Lord healed me." That day, my life changed forever. It wasn't just the fact that the cancer had disappeared, but what that meant spiritually. I realized more than ever that God is faithful to His promises. Even in moments when everything seemed lost, He was with me. And He didn't just sustain me, He healed me completely. That healing wasn't just physical. It was as if my heart, my mind, and my faith had been renewed as well. I was filled with a gratitude that words couldn't express. The fear that had once haunted me was now gone. I knew that no matter what the future held, God had shown me His power and His love in a way I would never forget. The following Sunday, I went to church with my family. It was a very special moment, as everyone there had prayed with me throughout the journey. When I stood before the congregation to share my testimony, the church filled with praise. Many people cried, others raised their hands in worship, and with my voice trembling from emotion, I declared, "The Lord healed me, and to Him be all the glory." From that day on, I realized that my story wasn't just mine. It was a living testimony of God's power. And everywhere I went, people asked about what had happened. I felt that God had given me this experience so that, through it, I could spread hope. My healing was a testimony to God's power. Every time I spoke about it, every time I shared what God had done, my faith grew even stronger. At that moment, I understood that the healing God gave me was just the beginning of a new journey of faith. He not only restored my body, but also my spirit, my heart, and my life's mission. After the miracle of healing, my life took a new direction. I knew I wasn't the same person anymore. Something deep within me had changed in a profound and irreversible way. God hadn't just healed my body. He had completely renewed my faith, my perspective on life, and most importantly, my purpose. Every breath I took now was a living reminder of God's power and grace. The days following my healing were filled with pure gratitude. Every morning I woke up without pain. Every moment I had with my family, everything felt like a new gift. The simple things that I might not have noticed before now held immense value. My children's laughter, breakfast with my husband, the simple act of walking outside. I saw everything with fresh eyes, full of gratitude. The miracle of healing didn't just give me a second chance at life. It gave me a new way of living. Deep in my heart, I knew this story wasn't just for me. God healed me so that I could be a witness to His power. From then on, I began to share my testimony everywhere I went. Doors began to open in ways I never could have imagined. Churches invited me to tell what God had done. And every time I shared my story, I saw how it renewed people's faith, just as it had renewed mine. I remember the first time I stood in front of my church to give my full testimony. My heart was racing, not because I was nervous, but because I knew this moment was for God's glory. Looking out at the congregation, I saw many familiar faces, people who had prayed with me throughout the journey. I held the microphone with trembling hands and began to tell, from the beginning, how everything had happened. Tears streamed down my face as I recalled every detail. It was as if I were reliving each moment, but now with a completely different perspective. When I reached the point where the doctor said the tumor had disappeared, the church filled with praise. People were crying, raising their hands in worship, and I, with my voice breaking with emotion, declared, "The Lord healed me, and to Him be all the glory." Over the next few months, I began receiving invitations to share my testimony at other churches and events. Each time I spoke, I realized how much my story impacted people's lives. Often, after sharing my testimony, someone would come up to me to tell me about their own personal struggle, an illness, a challenge, or a battle they were facing. In every one of those moments, I repeated what I had lived through myself. Trust in God. He is the God of the impossible. God didn't use me just to encourage those fighting cancer. I realized my story was helping people strengthen their faith in many areas of their lives. People who had lost hope, who felt forgotten or abandoned, were beginning to believe again that God was hearing their prayers. But the testimony of healing also profoundly changed my relationship with God. I no longer saw prayer as a simple routine. Now, praying was talking to a God whom I knew heard me and answered me. I also began to hear God's voice more clearly. My trust in Him was unshakable. I knew that whatever challenge the future might bring, God would be with me, just as He had been during my battle with cancer. Along with sharing my story, I began to get more involved in prayer groups. Together with other women from the church, I started interceding for those going through similar struggles. We gathered in small groups, praying for the sick, for people facing financial difficulties, and even for those who had lost their faith. Seeing others touched and healed by God brought me immense joy. I knew that what He had done for me, He could do for anyone. The physical healing was only the beginning. My heart had also been healed from so many fears and doubts I had carried. I was no longer afraid of death, nor of the future. I knew my life was completely in God's hands, and that gave me an indescribable peace. Each new day, I saw how God was using my story to bring hope to others, and that filled me with gratitude. One of the greatest transformations was within my own family. My husband, who had always been a man of faith, had his trust in God renewed in a deep way. He began to seek God more, to pray more fervently, and our relationship grew even stronger. My children, though still young, saw firsthand what the power of God in action looks like. I knew the testimony they now carried with them was something that would mark them forever. Today, when I look back and see everything I went through, my heart is filled with joy. I know that every tear, every hard night, and even the fear was transformed into an opportunity to glorify God's name. I am a living proof that God is faithful, that He still works miracles, and that we should never lose hope, even in the darkest moments. To Him be all the honor and all the glory. Now, my life has a new purpose. I will continue to share this story for as long as I live, so that more and more people can come to know the God who heals, restores, and transforms. If this testimony brought hope to your heart, share it with your friends and family. Many people are going through struggles and need to hear about the power of God, who still works miracles. Every time you share, you are spreading this message of faith and healing, allowing more lives to be impacted. God is faithful, and what He did for Anna, He can do for anyone. Click share now and spread this message of hope and transformation. May this testimony reach and transform many more lives through the power of God.